We are going through a terrible time. We all know that coronavirus pandemic, we call it popularly COVID-19 crisis, has changed our lives a lot. And in this condition, we all throughout the world were living in a situation which we named it as lockdown. This kinds of situations, calamities, whether they are man-made or whether they are natural calamities, they also come with an opportunity. It also gives an opportunity for creative impulses. Today we want to see one interesting poem which is a response to the COVID-19 crisis. We want to take a kind of a pictorial journey of this small pandemic poem known as Lockdown, written by Poet Laureate Simon Armitage. United Kingdom's Poet Laureate, Mr. Simon Armitage's creative response to the COVID-19 crisis. The title of the poem is Lockdown. Let us take a pictorial journey of this poem, and then, as we know that all utterances are always whether good or bad, but it also has some kinds of problems. This utterance of Simon Armitage, this poetic response to the COVID-19 crisis, how can we evaluate this poem? Where can we locate this poem, and is it possible to problematize this poem or not? Well, let us see. But first, let us take a pictorial journey of this pandemic poem. The poem has two dream sequences. The speaker, the voice in the poem is having a dream sequences. The first dream sequence is a hallucinating dream sequence of 1665-66 plague-stricken village Eam. It was a very famous Black Death plague that struck London, and thousands and millions of people died in that Black Death. Eam was on the northern side of London. It was not highly affected, but still, as the plague spread across countries and the regions, this village, Eam, was also affected, and there was a kind of a lockdown, quarantine and everything happening in this particular village also. The Great Plague of London, pictorial graphic says that it was a terrible death, people dying on the roads, and it was lot many painters also responded to this by drawing sketches of this pandemic. The London streets were full of dead bodies in 65 and 66. So there is a reminder of this deadly plague in this particular poem by Simon Armitage, which he tries to say with reference to something that happened in a small village known as Eam. But apart from this, there is something very interesting in this particular poem also. And that is that Simon Armitage also reminds us of a wonderful poetic expression by Kalidasa, Meghdut, a classic in Sanskrit literature. So the another dream sequence in this poem is an exotic dream wherein the dreamer travels back in time to Kalidasa's Meghdut, the cloud, a messenger, and he brings down the message there. A classic of Sanskrit language, Kalidasa's Meghdut, is a story about a person known as Yaksh, is far away from his wife, he is in exile, and he sends a message to wife through cloud, and so this is a cloud messenger, and then he tells to the cloud that when you will go across the plains towards the north of India, you will pass over a scenic beauty, landscapes of India, and that is a wonderful poetic expression done by Kalidasa in that poem. Well, that poem is not exactly about plague or such calamities, which we call it natural calamities. If there is any calamity, it is rather a man-made calamity, because Yaksh was punished by a king and he was in exile, far away from his beautiful wife, and he is pining here. So he's a lover who is pining for a wife and sends a message through cloud. Interesting imagination done by Kalidasa in this poem. Well, Simon Armitage is bringing these two distant images, one from the east and another from the west, and tries to put it into this poem known as Lockdown. The poem begins with this line, which obviously begins with end, and it begins with this line which reminds us of the fleas. And I couldn't escape the waking dream of infected fleas. That's how the poem begins, with the fleas. And the plague, those plagues of which killed so many people in Western countries, they used to spread because of fleas, and the fleas used to travel over the body of a rat, and widespread spreading used to happen in those times. So, and I couldn't escape the waking dream of infected fleas in the wrap and weft of soggy cloth by the tailor's hearth in ye old Eam. So a small village, Eam, is referred here in the beginning part of this poem. The poem is not a very long poem, it's a very short poem, but the reference of Eam comes here, there, in the wrap and weft of soggy cloth by the tailor's hearth in ye old Eam. The next line of this poem, then couldn't unsee the boundary stone. Now this boundary stone is something very, very interesting here. There is a stone lying in the picture that you can see. There is a boundary stone, and then when there is a plague and the people of one village cannot go to another village, there are boundary stones, and that was in a way quarantine lines. And if they have to exchange anything, they have to come up till this stone, and then they are not supposed to enter in each other's villages. So that is the then couldn't unsee, even in the dream, couldn't unsee the boundary stone. The cock-eyed dice with its 6 dark holes, thimbles brimming with vinegar wine, purging the plagued coins. These stones there, they used to have holes over it, and people used to put vinegar, wine inside the stone, and when they exchanged money transactions or the kinds of thing, then they used to put coins in this vinegar wine. So, well, today we do sanitization, sanitizers. So those were the ways of doing sanitization over a boundary stone. In the holes of the stone, vinegar wine, and the coins were put. The cock-eyed dice with its 6 dark holes, thimbles brimming with vinegar wine, purging the plagued coins. Now this is very interesting, which brought to mind the sorry story of Emmet Siddle and Roland Torrey, star-crossed lovers on either side of the quarantine line, whose wordless courtship spanned the river till she came no longer. So this is the end of the first part of this poem also, but the Eam village, plague-stricken village, a little bit far away from London, boundary stone, a kind of a quarantine line between them, and then what is important, there were 2 lovers. Some stories say they were betrothed, they were engaged to each other. They used to meet in the depths, the valley depths of between 2 villages. But because of plague, they were not able to meet each other. They used to meet outside, and because of the safety and security of everybody, they decided not to meet, so that through them, the plague do not spread across community. So the lovers, very interesting pair of star-crossed lovers, they decided not to meet so that the community spread of plague can be stopped. We need to advise people nowadays a lot to wear masks, sanitize hands, keep social distancing so that community spread can be stopped. Well, there is an interesting pair of lovers, Emmet Siddle and Roland Torrey, a star-crossed lovers which were on the either side of quarantine line, but they, as the story goes on, they themselves decided not to meet so that the community spread can be stopped. Simon Armitage has brought in a very interesting, almost forgotten love story of star-crossed lovers to remind us in this time of lockdown and corona crisis, whose wordless courtship spanned the river till she never came. The story goes on. The entire family was affected by plague and they passed away. By the month of April, the effect of the plague receded. Roland Torrey entered the village to greet but she was found dead. So that was a tragic story of two lovers. Here, Emmet Siddle, Roland Torrey. Simon Armitage brings down this reference to this story here. Even today, in the church of Eam, there is a wonderful glass painting. This glass painting, a stained glass window in Eam Church, depicting the plague outbreak. If you will see in the corner, you will see this story also of Emmet and Roland also being engraved in this glass painting. And you see that there is a kind of a river flowing in between in this also, which was there. So the memory of these lovers is preserved and stored in the small church of Eam also. Well, second part of this poem, but slept again and dreamt this time of exiled Yaksh sending word to his lost wife on a passing cloud. So the second dream sequence, slept again and dreamt this time of the exiled Yaksh sending word to his lost wife on a passing cloud. So the pictures are also the very interesting depiction of the pictures. Now, something very interesting. One picture we have seen of England, Eam, a very tragic image that came from the plague-stricken region. Whereas here, now the scenes from India, they are so beautiful, they are so exotic scenes that Simon Armitage is bringing here. And this itself is something very interesting to observe also. The next lines of this poem, because a cloud that flowed on earthly map, the cloud that flowed on earthly map of camels, trails and cattle tracks is going to pass through, and on the path there will be camel tracks, camel trails and cattle tracks on the path. Streams like necklaces, that is what the cloud is supposed to see. The streams, rivulets, rivers like necklaces lying on the earthly map, and the cloud would be floating over this scenic beauty and the landscapes. Fan-tailed peacocks, the hieroglyphs of wide-winged cranes also. So dancing cranes, wide-winged dancing cranes, or the peacocks, beautiful peacocks, fan-tailed dancing peacocks would be something that this cloud must be observing while moving towards Yakshini, the wife of Yaksh there. Wide-winged cranes, and the dancing of the cranes also is having its own beauty. If peacock's dancing has its own beauty, the dancing of this wide-winged cranes, and when they dance in pair, it gives equally beautiful scene like the peacocks dancing also. So Simon Armitage, taking reference from Kalidasa's Meghdut, brings to us this all wonderful images there. Here we are seeing some of the moving pictures of those still images. Painted elephants also is reminded here. Painted elephants as a sign again of India. This elephant is a sign which many of the post-colonial critics do not like when people talk about snake charmers. Obviously, there are no snake charmers or snakes in this poem, but elephants and painted elephants, obviously there is a reference to that, which is a very strong reference to India as a global at a global level. Embroidered bed sheets of meadows and hedges. So embroidery, Indian embroidery, the art of embroidery also has been referred by Simon Armitage in this poem. Bamboo forests and snow-hatted peaks, waterfalls, creeks, so like almost all the geographical terrain of India. Well, this cloud is supposed to move from the central India to the northern India. So while we move from central India to northern India, we find wonderful, there are deserts, there are plains, there are huge pine trees, bamboo trees, forest, there are mountains, there are cliffs, there are creeks, there are waterfalls, and obviously when you reach to the Himachal Pradesh and beyond that Himalayas, the great Himalayas, when you reach there you find snow-hatted peaks also there. So Kalidasa's imagination obviously was very powerful. The aesthetics of Kalidasa's literature and the kind of images, metaphors given by him in Sanskrit literature has made Sanskrit literature very rich literature. But it is very interesting to see, very surprising also to see that Simon Armitage has captured that nuance of Kalidasa, has captured that nuance of the tradition of Sanskrit literature, the aestheticity of that, and then he has brought down those images and those symbols into this poem of Lockdown, where we see bamboo forests, snow-hatted peaks, waterfalls and creeks also there. Yeah? Moving towards the final lines of this poem, and the glistening lotus flower after rain, and then the last lines of this poem, the air hypnotically see-through rare, the journey a ponderous one at times, long and slow, but necessarily so. So journey of this long and slow, but a necessary journey. We are ending our journey of this poem also, a pictorial journey of this poem also, and why it is a necessary so to go through this particular poem in this time of lockdown or corona crisis. Well, let us try to observe that also. This is the end of this poem, the pictorial journey of this poem with this last line. The air hypnotically see through rare, the journey a ponderous one at times, long and slow, but necessarily slow. The poem reminds of a couple of very interesting poems or literatures, and this literatures which comes in the mind when we refer to this poem, which speaks about an image from west and then an image from east, is something that those literatures which are meant to join people, those literary writers who want to see that people, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their religion, their caste, creed, color, they come together. And then they stay as like one family, Vasudhaiv Kutum, like one, the world is a family. Like that, that literature or those writers who has this vision of looking, of togetherness, we can locate this poem also in that larger category of literature. By and large, literature will always try to see that people remain together peacefully with each other, and any kind of factions or fractures or fissures which society or culture or powerful people in society try to make, the voice of literature will obviously be against them. But then All poets are not that vocal to be anti-power. Sometimes they just say metaphorically. Perhaps Simon Armitage, a poet laureate, being in that position officially as a poet laureate, is not expressing very vocally or openly about the separatedness which is being spread across by the political leaders, including in UK also, or EU also, or America also, or in various parts of India. But then this. So this poem of Rudyard Kipling becomes something very interesting to see, which is obviously written quite ahead of time, almost 100 years back then. But then, oh, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet, till earth and sky stand presently at God's great judgment seat. But there is neither east nor west. Now this is very important line. Many times we have referred to Rudyard Kipling's line, like the first line only, the east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. Only that is what we referred. But well, Rudyard Kipling's that entire couplet tries to say that, but there is neither east nor west, border nor breed nor birth. When two strong men stand face to face, though they come from the ends of the earth. When two large communities come together, from one is the eastern community, another is the western community, then there is no other scope. But then they can meet, even if they come from the farthest end of the earth. So there is no such demarcation. There is nothing like east. There is nothing like west. There are no borders, no breed, no birth. All are one. All are supposed to be one, going beyond all these demarcations. How can we forget this famous lines from Gitanjali when we speak of literature about togetherness, literature about Vasudhaiv Kutumb? How can we not remember these famous lines like, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where the world come out from the depth of truth. We're not going to talk today about the depth of truth, but this lines that world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. So this is what this lockdown also perhaps tries to say symbolically when it portrays the picture from Eam and then Kalidasa's India here. These poems or this kind of literature are an answer to the breaking world order. Whenever the writers feel that they are being threatened by some kinds of powers which are trying to break the world into pieces, and before they can have a hammer to shatter down everything about humanity, they would come and they will utter their voice. Shattered face of humanity also we face today. The picture is very symbolical. There are two eyes in this picture, which is a shattered image on the mirror pens. One is awestruck and fearful eye, the another is vengeful and threatening eye. So, well, the world in a broader way is divided into these two kinds of communities, people, nations, everywhere, and that is, one is awestruck and fearful, the another is vengeful and threatening. And this literature perhaps tries to say in that parameter that, well, we have to raise our voices against this way of looking that is awestruck or fearful or vengeful or threatening, and there is a dire need of a kind of literature to come out to answer this shattered face of humanity, or the crisis that humanity is facing there. We are in difficult time. We are in dire need of such poems which may inspire us to be together rather than separated. We need this literature there. And the crisis, this is a natural crisis, the COVID-19 crisis that has come into our life in a sudden way. But if it also if it has made us possible to stay together, it also has raised many questions about our separatedness also. And such poems, such literatures are always with us to guide us and be together in this point of view also. But before I go to the last concluding part of this poem, I would like to raise one interesting question about this, which the viewers can ponder upon, and if you would like to, you can write something in the comment wherever you are watching this video, or my email address is also given. You can share your views also. My concern or question also to this poem, or this response to the COVID-19 crisis also, is that imagine if I am not an Indian, or I am not an Englishman, I am not neither an European nor an Indian, then how may I view this poem? If the poem speaks about the West and the East, even the people in the West may perhaps associate themselves with this representation of West or not, or will the entire East associate themselves with a reference to Kalidasa or not? To be very blunt and straightforward, let me say, if I am an African national, or by origin I am from any of the African countries, or if I am a Chinese, how would I react to this poem? Are there no other points between far east and far west? Is there no north and south? So what are the voices of the north and the south? What are those points between the far east and far west? What may be the way that the Chinese, the Africans, and many innumerable other lives which also matter a lot also would react and say to this? When T.S. Eliot said in his famous essay Tradition and Individual Talent that the literature of tradition, the tradition of the literature, begins from Homer, and then people said it is very highly Eurocentric viewpoint. The literature begin beyond Homer also. And obviously we used to say in India here that Sanskritic tradition of writing literature, the oral tradition of literature in India is much older than the Greek tradition also. So how can one say that the literature begins, the tradition of literature begins from Homer? So we objected to T.S. Eliot and also was labeled as Eurocentric. This poem poses another questions. If I am Chinese, if I am African, if I am anybody who is not being represented in this poem in larger categories of East and West, what about the midpoints? What about the North? What about the South? It would be very interesting to read your viewpoints. Please give your comment and share your viewpoints regarding this poem. Thank you very much for listening to this